All right, man. What a pleasure. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. Thanks for joining us on another episode of New Scoreboards as a part of the Be Extraordinary podcast. And I'm joined by Chris Mayberry, easily one of the most influential men in my life. And it's funny, I was sharing earlier before you were coming on the podcast, is that in hindsight, that's so clear. In the moment, you don't realize how important and how impactful coaches are.
Sure.
At any level of leadership. So I want to unpack that today, but a little bit about you. And as I'm prepping for this, I told coaches, I'll probably call you throughout this episode. I thought I knew most of your story, and we've done some great things together. But you've been one of the most successful high school basketball coaches that I know for 25 years. And I mean, that includes 7 Final Fours, 2 state championships in 2 different states, Texas and Florida. You've coached top 10 draft picks. I think almost 30 different kids that played Division I or college basketball. And you've had successful teams throughout. And I know you and I were able to go to the first Final Four together in 2005, the first academy where you now coach and teach currently, which was so fun. And then back-to-back again in 2006, where throughout that time span, I was able to achieve Player of the Year, and you were able to achieve Coach of the Year. And so it's just such a fun journey. Sure. And now you have kids that have grown up, and of course you have a beautiful wife and family. And I want to talk about coaching. I want to talk about player development. I want to talk about relationships. I want to talk about culture, standards, and all this amongst the umbrella. But something I respect so much about you is that we talk a lot about the slight edge, and time either promotes you or exposes you. And your ability to maintain, develop relationships and trust and throughout decades of time is so impressive. And you have players that come back that want to be a part of the program, people like me that want to support from afar. And I just appreciate it, man. So
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. You say that now until I'm grilling you with questions.
No. We talked about this quite a while ago, and for whatever reason, just didn't work out. So I'm grateful to be on. Thank you.
Yeah. So, of course, you got into coaching, but you didn't start with coaching. You started as a player.
Yeah, so playing growing up, obviously, and played high school ball at Altamont Christian locally down by the Altamont Mall. Small-time basketball, but 4 of the kids that I played with played college basketball on that team. Surprisingly enough, my senior year, we went 22-6. Mm-hmm. Probably my only year of winning. We lost to Heritage Prep 4 times, and they the next year went to 1A in Florida high school and went to the Final Four. So it was a good team.
Yeah.
Several Division I guys. So, yeah, I went to college at Baptist Bible College, Springfield, Missouri. During those days, if you weren't at a bigger school, you're not going to play college basketball. And I had a dream. I wanted to play college basketball. I think fueled from my dad telling me, you'll never play college basketball. So I said, I'm going to do it. And so I went to Baptist Bible College, had a good first semester, and then homesick, immature, you name it.
Middle Missouri. It was cold as heck. And I was playing. I was maybe averaging 7 or 8 points a game as a freshman, but just immaturity. Came home, worked for 10 months. Calvary Assembly was one of my jobs on the grounds crew. And then a buddy of mine his family was moving from Australia as missionaries to the Czech Republic a few years after the Iron Curtain had come down. Oh, wow. Said, hey, you want to go to Czech Republic, 5.5 months. At the time, you don't really understand how long 5.5 months is to be in a foreign country, but we went over there and did mission work. For 5.5 months.
5.5 months. Worked out, did a little basketball, and then did a ton of mission work. Learned a ton about myself. The Lord really kind of got a hold of me. Wasn't a guy that was out doing stupid stuff, but just kind of wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. So then after 5.5 months over there, I came back. Was in pretty good shape because I'd been lifting and playing a little bit, and then tried out for Valencia. I had a friend that knew the coach and said, hey, you should go try out. Saw me in a men's league. I was playing pretty well, one of those deals. So I tried out. There was tons of guys trying out over several Saturdays. He asked me to come back 2 Saturdays. Went from 300 trying out to the 16th man on a 15-man team. Hey, you can walk on practice with us, but you'll never play. Mm-hmm. But in preseason, I crushed it. Winning all the miles, doing all these different things. So then, all right, hey, you'll be a part of the team, but you probably won't play. Ended up just, hey, coach, I'll play the 4. I'll do whatever you want me to do. Guarding kids that were going to Rhode Island, other places, playing JUCO, as you know, it's high-level basketball. Mm-hmm. And then went on to be a starter that year. And we didn't have a good team at all, but I think I averaged like 7 7.5 points a game on a team with a kid going to DePaul that averaged 27 or whatever. So really kind of earned my stripes in junior college basketball and played against obviously incredible athleticism and great players. And then after that, I worked out for a year and finished my AA at Valencia. And then Bryan College in Dayton, Tennessee, went up for a tryout, ended up getting a full tuition scholarship from Coach Morris Mahalski, played there for 2 years, and then met my wife there, which obviously a huge factor. And, you know, we've just had an incredible 25 years together, and 27 if you count the dating and all that. So phenomenal, you know, just time. Learned my senior year in basketball, I just kind of wanted to be a coach because I felt like I had good guys coaching me, but they didn't necessarily have the best X's and O's at times. And so I always wanted to be a coach because I wanted to prove I could win, and I didn't win much as a player. Mm-hmm. So my senior year, me and Jim Arnold, who you probably competed against at Orangewood, we coached a team up at, it's called an NACA. They still do it. It's like an all-star thing. Yep. We grabbed a team, and we had a blast that week, just hanging out with some high school kids that were pretty good players. And we both went into coaching after our senior year. So that's kind of what got me into it. And here we are 26 years later, not thinking I would have coached high school for this long. Thought I was going to coach high school a couple years and then go to college. Yep. And then we started having a family, and that just didn't make sense because I wanted to be around and be a great dad. So I decided I would just stay in high school. Never thought I'd coach my own kids or any of that type of stuff, which has happened. So yeah, that's kind of the...
Wow, I just learned a couple things. One, I didn't know you met Becky at Bryan.
Yes.
And then two, you kind of introduced where we've met was kind of that first job at the First Academy back in 1998 where you started as assistant varsity but head JV coach. Shortly after that, a few years later, take on as varsity, and then obviously never look back. And it's funny watching your sons play a little bit over the years.
Sure.
But specifically your younger son, who's going to be a junior, I can't help. I see a lot of myself in him, man. But he's a competitor, and he's got a real chance. So, and by the way, if you don't know about Chris Mayberry, super athletic. I mean, you would never know, but the coach that could, when we first met him, he 22 years old or 23 years old when he came to the First Academy. Yep. I think my brother was there. I wasn't there yet, so you coached my brother before me. But I'll never forget. I'm like, who's this white guy doing 360s and through, you know, like can dunk it any way he wants. And so you immediately kind of commanded respect at the school because you walk the walk, right? You could play. The guys really gravitated, you know, towards you. I don't know if this is still the case. I think it is, but I would view you more as like a player's coach to where, hey, he's young enough, he's sharp enough, I can relate to him. But then there's the other side of that where this guy's not scared to hold me accountable and have a high standard. Yep. And it's cool to watch you evolve from your playing days, and it's cool because you had a chip on your shoulder, it sounds like, and maybe still a little bit do. I know I do too. Yep. But there's been an evolution too, right? Because at 23, when I'd watch you coach or be coached by you, I mean, that was a razor sharp, fiery guy. 100%. And the fire is still there, but I think you've learned to temper it and channel it in different ways. So, sure. Yeah, maybe share a little bit about that. Well,
sidebar back to Becky, meeting Becky, is she was supposed to go to the University of Florida on a full scholarship. And she went to a youth camp, and her mom and dad, she said, hey, I'm supposed to go to this college. It was late June, like beginning of June. So anyway, long story short on that is I really felt like the Lord kind of put that together for us to meet. But she ends up coming to Bryan College, didn't have much money scholarship-wise because it was so late in the game. Obviously a very good student, all that stuff to get a full ride to Florida. But anyway, I just kind of see God's hand on relationships and building throughout the years. But as far as what you were talking about, I'm still pretty tough to play for. Mm-hmm. I think the guys respect me, but I can get on kids pretty hard, which has always been probably my biggest problem coaching is I try to hold them to a standard, and sometimes I'll get frustrated if they don't want to be held to a standard. Mm-hmm. So you're talked about sharpness, sharp tongue, all the different things that make it tough to coach. But I think I temper it sometimes with relationship building, which a story on that is Becky used to get, like early on in our marriage and when we had young kids, she used to always say, hey, you keep in touch with your players so much, like you do a great job, but we got this family thing going on. Right. And so I just remember vividly, it was probably when you were just coming out of high school and into those next few years where I started to say, hey, I can't keep in as much touch with my former players as I used to because I got these youngins and I got to, be more focused on home. So actually becoming a better dad, a better husband, and trying to semi keep those relationships.
Four kids.
4 kids.
2 girls, 2 boys.
Yeah, Cole's 21 now. Ansley's about to be 20. She's at North Florida. Cole just finished up his AA at Valencia. And then Luke's a sophomore. You saw him play this year. And then Callie's a 7th grader. So
and ironically, now being a parent with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, one, I can't imagine having 2 more of those things. Sure. And then also having the role that you've had over the years where, you're always going to an event, a game, a practice, or be there in the morning to shoot.
Yep.
And of course, you've had some great support and coaches along the way. I could name 10 of them right now, but I won't.
Yeah.
But, I talk about coaching, and I think about earning the right, because you just mentioned that. So let's go there. As far as some of my best memories with you, in hindsight at the time, I felt like were my worst memories.
Sure.
Because sometimes, no one really wants to be coached hard unless, one, they respect and trust that person, that they have their interests in mind. But 2, let's just call it like it is. Human nature. It's like, I'm going to try to get by and go the path of least resistance. And so when I show up to practice or I show up to work or whatever it is, there are times and days, more often than not, if you don't have a coach that is pushing you, you're not going to do as much. And now, and that's what I was telling in hindsight, I'm so grateful for it, because I showed up to college ready because you prepared me for what's to come.
Sure.
I came in with 3 other guys, and I was easily the most ready in the weight room, ready to be coached hard, ready to be screamed at, right, held accountable. Yeah. And I'm grateful for it. I get chills talking about it because it's one of the biggest gifts of my life at that time. And so how do you balance that as far as how do you approach earning relationships or earning trust with guys? Because the guys, if they don't trust you, they're not going to listen to you.
Sure.
So how do you approach that?
I think the biggest thing is time spent. I mean, like you said about getting in the gym, like almost every year, like when we start summer ball or spring workouts, you're spending time in the gym with the kids. Mm-hmm. And as AAU's kind of really cranked up over the last years, whatever it is, I've done less with the kids in the spring, and then you wait for them to get done with their AAU so you can get the summer. But I think it's really time spent in the gym, time spent texting them, asking them questions about things that are going on, talking to them in person, just trying to build relationships. It's not always perfect. Like some kids need it more than the others. Mm-hmm. Some kids don't have that great relationship with their father, their parents or whatever. So you're trying to like build a relationship with some of them, which I can say quite honestly, a lot of those kids are the kids that I gravitated toward, was to really try to help them, knowing that they needed help. They didn't know they needed help, but they needed that father figure to help them, or kind of an older brother when I was younger. But just really trying to spend time, get to know them, get to know their likes and dislikes. And then I feel like you can coach kids harder when you have a great relationships with them. Like you said, everyone doesn't want to be pushed at the highest level, but I always wanted every one of my kids to at least try to play college basketball, even if they couldn't. Mm-hmm. And that's what I was pushing them toward. Yeah. And so everything from the weight room to the way practice was, planned, to how hard we went, just trying to teach them that this is like preparing you for the next level. It's not fully there because high school kids aren't practicing as hard as college kids, but I knew that if I kept the standard real high, you go to different practices and college practices, and then maybe even other high school practices, you see what people are doing, and then you're kind of like, I want to have that standard. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things, if you ask people around, hey, what did the First Academy, what did Prestonwood, what were they known for? It was playing together, playing an unselfish brand of basketball, and playing exceptionally hard. That's what we've tried to instill in our guys. And I think we've kind of been able to stand the test of time. Like you said, we've had incredible assistant coaches, incredible support staff, great, athletic people that have poured into what we're trying to do. But it's always been about building kids' character through, having a chaplain and having a theme and, using scripture and doing different things like that, but also saying, hey, we're not going to be soft in any way. Mm-hmm. We're going to compete at a high level, and then also making the schedule. We've played Montverde multiple times when they've been top 10 in the country, been number 1. Fletcher's team played them when they were number 1, and then we took them, to the brink right there at the edge. And Albert Settles and some of those guys played against them. You played against them. And so we've tried to always push ourselves. Like, I've not been too concerned about overall wins for me. It's been more about preparing my team to be able to play in the playoffs.
Yeah, you mentioned something about overtime and the standard.
Yeah.
That's again over a 25-year period. You're having blips of going to the Final Four, but pretty consistent excellence, right?
Yeah.
Like regardless of the guys, like you've had, just like any team, you have more talented teams and less talented teams. And sometimes the more talented teams don't necessarily achieve their full potential. Sometimes I feel like we were a pretty overachieving team, quite frankly. I remember you talk about the theme for the year was believe. I remember that. And it was like, because we had never been to that level. So it was getting a group of guys that really only had one guy that played year-round basketball.
Sure.
And not anybody over 6'3", 6'4", and getting to believe. And so I wanted to ask you about the goals part. It sounds like you have kind of a minimum standard of hey, I'm going to coach you like you could go play college basketball, whether you do or want to or not. That's going to be kind of the minimum standard. But do you have guys that come to you and go, hey, coach, like, I want more. I want to go to the NBA. I want to be great. And then how do you approach that? Are you able to coach them harder to close that gap?
Sure. So kind of why I kind of had an edge always in coaching, especially as a high school coach, was my second year at TFA. My first year we were successful. We ended up losing to Arlington Country Day, who was probably ranked in the top 25 in the country, with some younger guys and then a young Steve Newman at that time.
I remember that game.
The second year I was at TFA, we lost in double overtime to go to the Final Four. We had to wait 5 more years for your team to make it to the Final Four. And that kind of gave me the juice, and obviously over time, 5 years is a long time, a really long time. And I just remember we had a kid named Malik, who is a great kid, but he had fouled a kid and was pouting about the play and didn't box out. And we lost at the buzzer because he didn't box out. And so I was a detail person. I want to make sure that the details didn't cost us a game. But I remember that fueling my fire. And like you just mentioned, to answer your question, yes, I mean, guys I can go back. But one of the first guys that I ever coached that I thought had incredible work ethic was Champ Rawls. And Champ Rawls is actually a local business guy.
Very successful.
Yeah, incredibly successful. They do stuff with businesses, passing them on through the family, the Rawls Company. And I've kept in great touch with him because he was just one of those kids. He wanted the smoke, quote unquote, all the time. What can I do to get better? And he didn't have God-given incredible talent. He worked hard, but he was on the shorter size. He was on the under-athletic size, but he got a lot out of what he had. Played Division III basketball, which was, to me, a minor miracle for what he had. And I just got kind of energized by those type of kids. And then when I got better players like Steve Newman, I wrote a letter to him. I got that coaching job in that summer before his senior year, and he was kind of on the lazy side. And I wrote him a letter. I still have the letter. And I wrote him a letter saying, basically, you need to ramp up in all these areas, spiritually, academically, emotionally, basketball-wise. You got to ramp up. And the kid went from having small Division I offers to ended up signing at Georgia, had University of Washington, Northwestern. And so those are the things that I can look back on and just say, yeah, I wanted those kids to push beyond. Hey, you're not satisfied with where you are today. He ended up playing in the overseas and in the G League, or what was it, the D League at that point, and became a really good player. In ACL probably cut it short. But I always wanted the kids to push themselves to a level they didn't think they would. And then some have pushed me. Yeah. Really, really hard. Fletcher McGee comes to mind as probably one of the guys who I couldn't keep up with. By the way,
is the all-time leading three-point maker
he was
in NCAA history?
Yeah, he was up until someone did it with a extra year.
Yeah.
But, I mean, work ethic, just unbelievable. Never say quit. Go get more shots. Hey, Fletcher, you really need to get rest. You need to, stop being so hard on your body. And probably has only learned as a professional that you can have diminishing returns after a while. But he, the work ethic, incredible. And obviously character, that's a big thing that we've always talked about. In order for you to be a great player, you got to have high character to be able to put in the work, to touch the lines, to overextend yourself whenever nobody's watching. And that's the thing, all those kids that put in the extra time, and you end up seeing them on sports. I remember his freshman year at Wofford, they played at Missouri. He goes in the game off the bench. He has 20 or 21, whatever it was. And it was like he never looked back after that. And even watching the success you had early on at UCF, and I could name a ton of players just to say, hey, these guys were workers. Yeah. And at the college basketball level, you have to love it. You have to absolutely love it because it's more like a job. Mm-hmm. The coach's job's on the line. The conditioning is off the charts in the preseason, in the weight room, all these different things. So to come to practice for 2.5, 3 hours every day and keep up with your schoolwork and whatever else, I've just kind of always known, even though I didn't play Division I basketball, I kind of knew what it was about through my guys.
Yeah, because you're going to hate it. So you better love it because you want it to be a love-hate because there's going to be most days you're going to hate it.
Yeah, exactly.
And, it's funny you mentioned Fletcher. When he started at his senior year just going on a tear and they're making and he's making these shots that are Sports Center seeming like every night. I was not surprised. No, so anybody around me, I'm like, no, if you know the dude and you know how long he's been putting in work, this is a compound effect thing.
100%.
And even for me, I look at even my career and not comparing because Fletcher was way harder of a worker and had a greater career, but I felt like I overachieved
100%.
Right, for my athleticism and what I had facing you. But what you taught and instilling, and I think players can learn this at the college level, you have to a certain extent outlast people.
Sure.
You have to work hard over a long period of time.
Right.
It takes what it takes. And Fletcher had been putting those reps in since he was a freshman or even before that, right? And so that's 8 years of the compound effect. And sometimes I feel like, when you're starting someone new in business or even players, it's like sometimes you just want it too quick. And you have to zoom out and say, hey, this is a long game, and I'm going to need to put in a lot of reps over a long period of time.
Yes.
And that's why I think coaching is so important because you need somebody other than you to demand that of you because it's the nature of things. You're just not going to do it yourself. But I do want to go back to the story about Steve because I didn't know that about the letter because you had been around Steve enough, right? And you're talking about as an assistant.
Yep.
And so you took over as the head guy.
Yep.
And you basically said, Steve, I know you enough. We have a relationship. We're going to demand more.
Yep.
You need to invest more. And, of course, he met that challenge.
Yeah, we had a great relationship because being the assistant, of course, you're not the bad guy. You're kind of you really aren't. I mean, I that's what I've always said to my assistants. Be the good guy. Love on them because I'm going to be hard on them. And so, with Steve, I had built that relationship from 98 when I came. He was, I forget what grade he was in, 8th or 9th grade, whatever it was, because your senior year – or his senior year, you were a freshman. Is that right? Am I remembering that right? And so, for him, I just said, hey, I've been around you. You're not the hardest working guy I've ever been around. You show up, you punch the card, and you do your stuff, but you got to take it to a different level. And he just, because of the relationship we have, then, and obviously still have a relationship, it's just like he was like, okay, I think you're right about this, and I'm going to do it. And then he had parents that were going, hey, you heard what he said. Like, I think you could be a good player, but you got to really get after it. His sister had a totally different mindset. Yep. Michelle always was an overachiever, kind of like my daughter Ansley, just very locked in and get stuff done. And Michelle was like that. And Steve just was kind of like, la-di-da, I'm good. I'm smart in the classroom. I get these grades. It's not that hard for me. Yep. Nothing was ever hard for him until he started putting the work into basketball. And it, paid off immensely. Ended up playing in the SEC for 20, 25 minutes a game for 4 years. Big so time. that was a lot of fun to watch that progression.
That's an absolute nugget for leadership is to say, if you've earned the right and built that relationship, like you can ask for more, like you can demand more and raise somebody's standard. Sometimes I think people are fearful of that because they want to be the nice guy. They want to be liked, but there's a part of that where the burden of leadership, whatever you want to call it, it's your job to invest in that person and raise the standard on their behalf at times.
Yeah, absolutely.
And invest in them. So that answers a big leadership question I have for you. And then also it's just like, how do you approach seeing something in kids? We talk about player development. I think about it in business. When you have a new recruit, there's sometimes just like that little bit of that spark. Is it the way they meet your coaching? Is it the way that when you invest, they invest back?
Sure.
How do you approach player development to where you're able to take a kid, like me, who's a 5'7" scrawny kid, and I remember you took over and then you put me on varsity.
Yeah, sure.
And I probably wasn't ready physically, but it's almost like you had this belief in me before I believed in myself. So it was like this counterbalance of like, I'm going to believe in you, but I'm also going to ask way more of you and be harder on you. Yeah. And so do you kind of see that in kids and you go meet them where they are? How do you kind of approach the player development side?
I'll use your case. So if you remember, I coached you at UCF camp when you were in like 6th grade or 7th grade. So I'd kind of known who you were. you obviously had a lot of skill. But for you, I always knew that you were going to be a great player. I remember too, after your junior year, I think you averaged like 16 or something your junior year. And I came to you and said, listen, you're going to have to score more on this team because all the guys around you, they're good players, but they're role players. And so you got to do a great job of, like, I think you averaged 25 a game your senior year. Right. And you wouldn't have wanted that per se because you were a pass first. You know, I got to make sure my team is taken care of. I got to lead this team in the right way. And I said, no, we got to have you score more, which as it turned out, as we went through that season, we definitely had to have you score more, especially in the bigger games. And you kind of met that challenge. But just trying to like see stuff in kids way before it happens. I think because I've coached for a while now, I can see a spark in kids. Also, I had a kid this year actually, and I think he's going to end up being a really good player. Lorenzo, number 2. He's not aware yet of how good he could be.
Right.
And I've seen him grown over 2 years, but he hasn't figured out all the different things it takes to be great. But I do think if he does catch that vision, he's got belief, but he doesn't have all the things that have been put into the belief yet, like the strong work ethic. He's good. He's talented, but a lot of his natural ability. And so I think trying to instill in him, hey, we just got to get you something so that you can go show what you're going to be capable of doing. And so just trying to see that before they see it, I think is something I've been able to pull out and have kids play above their level. Like you mentioned, your junior year, that team probably wasn't Final Four good.
Right.
But you also had, you know, I can think of specifically 3 guys on that team, Adam Gaunt, Alex Bird, and Clayton Crowfoot, who all were tougher than nails, played hard, and wanted to win.
Wanted it, yeah.
They wanted to win more than they wanted to score or be cool or any of those things. And so when you get a group of guys like that, along with a talented guy like yourself, then we were able to achieve a lot as a team. And I think it was your junior year that we won that Christmas tournament. Was that your junior year or senior? I think it was your junior year. And that's kind of when I knew, hey, we just beat, I think it was Apalachicola or something. We just beat a team that's probably going to the Final Four. And then I started to like really believe it as a coach, and you guys were believing it as players, and just trying to like pull that stuff out of kids before they actually know that they have it. I think that's something maybe I've gravitated toward, and maybe something I'm like somewhat talented at. I don't know that I'm the best X and O coach or the best player development coach or any of those things, but I do know that I have been able to pull things out of kids maybe before they were aware that they could do something. And I've always believed like, hey, we can play with Montverde on a given day. We can beat them. Admiral Farragut, was that your junior year? Junior year. Like I thought we maybe could beat them. They had 5, maybe 6 Division I players. We had 1.
Yeah.
And I thought, I went and watched them in person. I was like, oh, they're a little undisciplined. They're talented, but I think we can get them. And so I started believing that. And then we played Montverde right before the playoffs just so we could see what it was like.
Got beat up.
Luke Richard Maamute and a bunch of other dudes that could really play.
Yeah.
And honestly, I just started like as a coach just thinking, hey, I think I can beat teams that are better than us just because I believe it. Yeah. And so that instilled it in players. And then, I don't know, that's kind of how this year's team was similar like that. They were not the most talented. We might have one guy sign, but outside of that is a bunch of guys that just really wanted to be good and play hard and all that stuff.
I mean, if the thing is about having a program, and this is a business too, if you have to rely on having the most talented people every year, you're not going to be good over a long period of time. You're going to be like a roller coaster and you're not going to meet the minimum standards where you're always kind of competitive. And it's just very challenging. And I think that is a skill set of yours. And I will say from personal experience that is how it felt for me, is that you were reaching inside of me and we were collectively gathering evidence that you were good enough to do this. And then when it clicks, it clicks. And I remember for me, when it clicked, it was the junior year at Admiral Farragut, and I looked at you before the game and I said, hey man, hold on, right? And we went off and we beat them, and it was a crazy game. Ended up going to the Final Four. But I think every kid or every person that goes to work wants and has big dreams for themselves, right? And it's a big deal to have somebody on your sideline that believes in you.
Sure.
Maybe more than you do yourself at times, but is also willing to demand for you to close the gap. I always say, people have stuff that they want, but here's where they are. So your goals are way over here. So there's a gap. So we gotta put in work to close that gap.
Yeah.
And part of that is believing, because the belief starts to perpetuate that if I believe it, then I'm going to believe that I'm going to do the work and it'll be worth it. Because I know that if I do the work, I can accomplish it. And that's where confidence comes from. When you're at the free throw line at the end of the game, all you're thinking is like, I've done this, right? That's where the confidence comes from. But it's almost like the belief has to exist before you do the work, because you wouldn't put in that much work if you didn't believe it was possible.
That's very true.
So I just think about that in leadership. I think about that in coaching, that is so underrated. And it's such a balance, because you can't just go tell people pie in the sky that, hey, you can do it,
right,
even though they're doing nothing to prepare for it. But you also just can't, demand and beat kids over the head with stuff. You got to lift them up too. Mm-hmm. So I think about culture and standards, and we talk about culture a lot in our walls in business, but it's culture, starts in the locker room. Culture starts with the coaching staff. Culture starts with leadership. Yeah. And what do you think about, you mentioned a little bit about a culture you try to hold. How do you hold culture, standards, loving on kids, being playful versus, I'll just tell a story that I think would lead you into this answer. Again, in hindsight, one of my most impactful moments in my life is I was a kid that thought I had some game, had an attitude, was the younger brother, always playing against older kids. And here I am, I think it was like my sophomore year, I started to think I was better than I was. It was over a summer league game, I think. And I just had a bad attitude during the game. And it got to the point where I would run up and down the court pouting, and you pull me out and you say, hey, you're not going back in the game. And I'm like, I'm looking over and I'm like, there's only 5 guys. I'm the 5. So I'm like, I'm going to go back in the game. And so you tell the ref, you're like, hey, he's not going back in the game. The ref's like, we only have 4 guys. And you're like, yeah, no, we'll play with 4. And I'm sitting there like, this dude's crazy. Like,
it was actually a regular season.
Was
game.
it regular season?
Yeah.
Was it winter, spring?
I can't remember. It was at our place, but it was a regular season.
Was it regular
game.
season?
I'm pretty sure.
We just only had 5. But anyway, long story short, the ref's like, hey, actually, it's against the rules. You have to play them. So I went out the last quarter and basically just ran up and down the court, and no one passed me the ball because they were like, who's this idiot I'm playing with? And I remember immediately we go into the locker room. I don't even know if we met with the team. You called me in there and my dad, and you said, hey, bottom line, if he doesn't get it together, he will not be playing for me. And the greatest gift that you and my dad ever gave me is my dad said, you heard him. You either get right or you're off the team.
Yep.
He didn't say, like, coach, let me work this out. We'll talk to him. It was flat out right there. Like, make a decision on whether you're gonna come to my standard or you're not gonna be here. Yeah. And everything shifted from there for me, where it wasn't perfect. I still had an attitude, but I was called on the carpet and I had to make a decision to go to your standard or get out. So that's just an example of like what I would deem as a hard line and a standard. Although I know you loved me, although I know you cared about me, I knew I wasn't going to pull one past you.
Yeah. I think I said if you need to listen is what I think, like what you were saying is you had kind of gotten to where you were a pretty good player, but there was that factor of when you got coached hard, you were kind of bad body language, some of that stuff, talking back, whatever. And I just remember thinking, man, I'm either going to lose my best player right here or he's going to fall in line. And obviously give Bruce Young credit, who we're still very, close to your family to this day. But Bruce sat there and basically looked over at you and said, you heard him. Yeah. And I just remember going, man, thank God he said that, because here I could have got into a huge rift with my best player's parents and all this stuff. But he supported me. Obviously, he was in support of you too, but he was like, hey, you got to do this. Like, this is his program and his team and whatever. You got to take care of business. And I just remember going, all right, let's see if this happens. And I remember you made a shift. Like, you started being more coach. Wasn't perfect, obviously. Sure. You always had an edge. I have an edge. So we butted heads sometimes. I probably wanted to be a point guard, but never was. And so I always had that point guard mentality. And so coaching a point guard of your caliber, obviously you're a good player. It was a lot of fun, but, I just drew a line in the sand and tried to keep the culture where it was. And I think over time, I would say that the culture has stayed similar. There's been time where I could feel it slipping. And so the last couple of years, we've kind of drawn it back in the sand a little bit more to say, hey, I might not scream at you as much anymore or really get on you as hard as I used to, but there is going to be this line in the sand. You're going to do this. You're going to sprint back. You're going to all the little things. You're going to sit down and guard. Probably one of the things that we've really hung our program on is you're going to sit down and guard people. not get beat off the dribble consistently, whatever. So I think that's kind of where we've kind of set ourselves apart a little bit. And most, the public schools in Orlando, they'll play us some, but there's a lot of people that aren't necessarily like, yeah, let's put the First Academy on our schedule because, they know we're going to be tough and play hard and all that type of stuff. So I've enjoyed the public schools that will play us and enjoyed that we've been able to hold that standard for so, many years.
Yeah.
That's been kind of fun for me.
Yeah, and I think in business, I know within our ecosystem, it's like we have a blast together. But make no mistake, we are a high standards organization because if I have high standards for myself, I don't want to play with kids or I don't want to go to work with people that don't have a standard for themselves. Like I just have a mentality that A players don't want to play with C+ players.
Sure.
They, especially when it comes to attitude and effort.
You're right.
You may not be as talented, but if we're running sprints and I'm giving everything I have and you're not, like as a competitor, that's not going to work, right? And I think your ability to have a culture of standards attracts people that go, yeah, I see that. I want to be coached.
Sure.
And what's so ironic is it's for the good of the player. Yeah. That's what's so ironic is people think, coaching hard. It's like, no, in balance with trust, respectful with the right leader, it is absolutely in the player's best interest to be coached hard. So, well, cool, man. I just wanted to give you the floor a little bit because, one thing, talk about in hindsight, you've mentioned a couple of times about how you feel like you're called and God got a hold of you on the mission trip. And I'm learning throughout this conversation, the consistency on your relationship with our Creator and how you pursue your walk has been something that now as an adult looking back and on my own journey, I just have so much respect for. And you've kind of been this beacon of light we always say you want to be the lighthouse where the rocky shores and you can kind of see people like yourself off in the distance and you go, what's something's a little different about him, the way he carries himself, the way he raises his family, the way he, has a standard for himself and the people around him, versus being the person that, has the flashlight and is looking at you all the time. And then all of a sudden you've been the beacon of light for me in a lot of ways. So I'm just curious how you hold that with what you're doing. Do you still feel called to do what you're doing? And just curious.
Yeah. So, I would just say humility is a big factor. I don't consider myself to be anything special. I've just tried to be consistent. And that's what, I've tried to do from, whether it's quiet time, which I haven't been the best at times, getting in the Word, having men around me. I've always tried to put men on my coaching staff that would challenge me. I had Scott Simpson this year. He's a good dude. He called me after a game. Hey, you were a little hard on the guys tonight. Probably shouldn't have yelled at so-and-so, shouldn't have done this. And I've always enjoyed having those type of people around me, like Jimmy Knott for years that did it. And so I think putting people around you that sharpen you, being consistent, listening to my wife, Becky still gets embarrassed at times when I get on kids, especially publicly. And I always say this, there's, you can come to your workplace and you're in your office and no one's ever seeing you get on somebody or whatever. They're seeing me in public because I have a public job. Obviously I get in practice and I dig into kids and get on them about not going hard. But when you see a game, you're going to see me get on kids sometimes, but that's, public. So, it's kept me humble, like my wife, especially, some people that are close to me. And I've gotten a lot better, but I need to continue to get better. And I think that's probably the next thing would be just never thinking that you've arrived, even though we've won some games and we've won some championships or this or that, is not being satisfied with that and just not being really about that piece of it. I think the success comes from you pouring into people, loving on people, always having, an opportunity to help kids through things off the court as well. Just dealing with over the last few years, some of my college players, trying to help them and navigate some things has been something that I've always kind of taken pride in. And then, the phone call from somebody who maybe didn't even play college basketball and just trying to help them through things. And as husbands, fathers, or they're single guys just out there trying to navigate life, is just consistency and then trying to be humble and just, doing my best, knowing that I've been blessed and I've been, God's given me a platform, and just trying to always keep that in mind. Far from perfect, but definitely trying to just be consistent in some of those things.
You have been consistent. I say that knowing that all the stuff that everyone goes through in life, and the ups, the downs, the falling short. You have been absolutely the man that I met you, and to the man you are now. There's been an evolution that I've witnessed from seeing you on the sidelines, and I appreciate it. And I also say, like, love, right? Time to love on kids and be hard on kids. I think that being hard on kids is from love.
Sure.
I think, yes, of course, there's a competitor, there's an ego that we all have to be aware of, that out of balance, you reflect, and this is me talking, to say, hey, is this about me or is this about the kids?
Sure.
And I think the hardness when it's about the kids is about love. When the hardness is about me, it's about ego.
Sure.
And making sure that, everyone sees my accomplishments.
Yeah, sure.
And I think we all, as any sort of achiever, you kind of walk that balance.
Oh, yeah.
And you're never perfect.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, the Bible talks about how the Lord disciplines who he loves. And I've always kind of taken that as, if I don't discipline my guys or tell them, hey, this is going to cost you in the future, I feel like I'm doing them a disservice. No doubt. Whether it's, I've had kids off the court that were struggling with different things, telling them, hey, man, if you keep going down this road, I just know that this is not going to end well. Yep. And so I always felt like I had to be the person saying, sounding the alarm, saying, you got to listen on this because you're going to get yourself in trouble. Yep. So that's kind of where I've done that all my career as best I could. Obviously, you're closer than other players than you are with some other guys, but I've just tried to, whoever wanted to have that close relationship, I've always tried to, hey, you're asking me to say some stuff that you might not like, but I'm going to be the guy. And I've always been that guy. My son Cole is a truth teller to a point where it probably cost him sometimes on relationships, but he's got it. Yeah. He's come from it, honestly, through me. Becky's a lot more mild. Yep. She's truthful, but she'll do it in a kinder way. Sure. I'll just be very blunt, truth honest, but I just always say I don't have time to do all this other stuff. I'm going to love you, but I'm going to tell you the truth, like from day one, what level of college I think you can play. Can you play college? What your work ethic's like, all these different things, just trying to help them become great men. And that's kind of been, I guess, my biggest joy is to sit across from a guy like you and go, gosh, man, I thought you'd end up doing some good things, but the way you've done it, it's been really, that's probably my biggest joy in coaching, is watching immature young men become grown men that follow the Lord, love their family well, do something great, with their life. That's been my probably greatest joy.
Man,
so
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
That. I last thing, and then I'll let you get out of here. Yeah. I could go for hours.
Sure.
Telling war stories too, but what would you say? This platform, New Scoreboards, is really started by me getting done with basketball and having this emptiness within my identity of, hey, I'm used to failing a lot. I'm used to being coached hard. I'd give anything for a film session. Somebody to scream at me.
Sure.
I know at the end of the practice or end of the drill or end of the game, we won or we lost in business. And this new, I kind of think we're winning. I kind of think, right, I'm looking for that scoreboard. But a lot of people struggle in that transition between things or between sports and business. So is there anything you would encourage a young kid or a younger you to say, hey, man, it's going to be all right? Or, hey, man, looking back, I have this wisdom I'd share with you. Yeah, it's been a struggle for me because I still like to, my body's, I'm almost 50 now. It's kind of breaking down. You still done? Broke my, if you paid me, I probably could. But I broke my ankle a few years back playing with our guys. Oof. Broke it bad. Had an avulsion fracture, which means your bones just blow up. I can't watch ankles. Yeah, it was bad. So anyway, like that kind of told me like, hey, it might be time for you to not play as much. And then Luke, of course, he's 10th grade now. He's like, hey, I beat you the last time we played one-on-one. And, he's getting big and strong and all that stuff. But I would say to kids, young men coming up, you got to figure out what the new scoreboard is. Like what is that? And one of the big pieces to me is mentoring and helping others like achieve like whatever you've wanted to achieve or whatever they want to achieve. And then I think serving. Just finding opportunities to give back to your community, your younger people around you, doing things like that. I think probably some of the biggest joys Becky and I have is like looking back on our journey is helping a kid along the way. And then when they become an adult, maybe jumping back in and helping them again. Mm-hmm. So that's probably been the most rewarding for us, whether it was monetarily or an extra trip or, those type of things. It's probably taking that extra step, going the extra mile to try to help
somebody, I think it kind of fills some of the voids, because competitiveness it's inborn in me through losing, really. And like I told you, I won my senior year, but I never won in college. And so like when I see Giancarlo Valdez, we've been to the Dominican Republic 3 times with his family. He's on Stetson's team. They just made the big dance.
So cool.
Bro, like I'm in the stands, like getting teary-eyed going, man, I've known this kid. I've known his dad since before he's born. And now he's playing in the NCAA tournament, something that I would have loved to do, but it's so fun to like kind of watch and through their eyes. So just, kind of loving on and giving back to some of those, people has been just probably the most rewarding things of my career. And, pursuing good things, obviously is such a factor, not getting caught up in the wrong things. Sure. And that's what I've tried to tell my players throughout the year. We've always talked about person, student, player. I know Embry Riddle does student, person, player, and we changed it to person because spiritually we're going to care about you more than anything, where you're going to spend eternity. Secondly, you're going to be a great student because we know it translates. Yep. And then player, you're going to put everything you have into being a great basketball player because that translates to the insurance world, whatever. If you've put in the work and known that you had to take care of your body, you have to eat right, you have to lift right, you have to do all these different things, we think all that stuff translates. Yeah. And so that's probably what I would say just for the next people coming up.
Person, student, player.
Yep.
I also think for the listener, it's like, sometimes I looked at this in my own life to say like, man, what, you mentioned giving back and serving, and you look at other people, and I even look at other people like you in my life and like, well, yeah, that's for them. I don't know. I haven't been called yet to what I'm going to do. And somebody said, they said that you basically can give the most to the person that you once were. And if you can take inventory of, like even the kid that you're referencing that was losing a lot and had a chip on her shoulder, it's like now you're back like investing in people to kind of avoid some of that losing or to become better or to achieve the goals that maybe you didn't necessarily achieve or accomplish or whatever it is. And I look at that in my own life, and that's part of the reason for this new Scoreboards platform is to say, I had a lot of challenge with this. Why don't I just share that and let's talk about that challenge and try to give that gift to the world. So I think sometimes people get caught in like, well, I don't know what to do, or that's just for them. And sometimes you can just look at where your feet are and look at the experience that God gave you and the timing of the people that showed up in your life and just reflect and then figure out how you can serve within that.
Well, one thing I would like say that would encourage others is for a lot of years, I went to a Bible college out of high school. I thought I was supposed to be a missionary youth pastor. It didn't end up that way. But I feel like God used that to take my teams on mission trips and to do what I could do.
Right.
And so I think so many times like people are like, oh, if you're not a pastor, if you're not a this, you can't really. And I would say that's totally untrue. And stop putting that pressure on yourself, because you can impact so many people just where you're at. Right. And it can be in a super small way. You might not be the person, like, I don't feel like I'm great in front of people, like big crowds, but I know people who are, but I can't be like over here getting all upset because, if I want to be better, then I got to work at it.
Right.
I got to do those things, but just wherever God puts you, wherever he plants you, is just to help one or two people around you in some way, shape, or form. And it could be just, encouraging them. It could be taking them out to breakfast. It could be one of those things. I think that's probably the biggest discouragement I had over many years, but how God's kind of brought that out of me is just like, you can make a difference. Yeah. And when I talk to, guys like you and former players and even really former, all kinds of people that worked with us, it was like, hey, remember you said this one time? I'm like, bro, I don't even remember that. And they were like, yeah, it led me to do this. Yes. And I was like, really?
Crazy. It's
and
like
you kind of get chills, like you were saying, like, wow, I made an impact on them.
But man, I look at this, and obviously you hold your position as a coach, but to me, this is a leadership episode. What it takes to lead men, lead humans, lead yourself. And, we've talked about development, we've talked about culture, we've talked about standards, and we've talked about relationships and trust, all things under the leadership umbrella, man. Coach, I appreciate you joining us, and we're better for it.
Yeah, thanks, Taylor, for having me. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate it, man.
Yeah.
Cool stuff, awesome, man.
Yeah, it was a fun time.
Love you, man.
Love you too, man.